Today I am going to show you how to construct the back kick pleat section of the Whitney raincoat, which is my latest pattern. This tutorial is specific to the Whitney raincoat, but if you have a pattern with a similar back kick pleat situation, you may find this tutorial helpful as well. So I have the center back piece, and this is facing upwards, and this is my pleat piece. And I have the top edge of the pleat lined up with the notch in the center back, and I am going to sew this at the 1/2 inch seam allowance. And while I have this side here, I'm going to flip right side out, and I'm going to make sure that the seam allowance underneath stays pointed away from the center back, so that when I do my understitching and I understitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam that I just sewed, I will catch all of those seam allowances underneath. And that is going to give me a real nice turned edge for that pleat opening. Now I'm going to repeat what I just did for the other side of the pleat. And I am going to place my other center back piece on top of the pleat. The coat that I'm working on is interlined with muslin, so because it is a lighter weight fabric than I would like, so I have interlined it with muslin. And my notch is lined up with the top edge of my pleat piece. And again, I am going to stitch at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I am going to fold this right side out. Make sure that all of my seam allowances are pointed away from the center back line, and do my understitching. And when I'm understitching, I'm stitching on the pleat piece, not on the center back piece. Just inside the seam, we just sewed on the pleat side of the seam. And now I have what you should have is this piece with a big square cutout at the top. We're going to fold this so that our center back pieces are right sides together. And our pleat piece is now folded in half at the center back notch. And it's going to kind of create this little L shape here. And we are going to stitch the center back seam all the way down at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And we're going to stop when we get to the stitching that we made from connecting the pleat piece. We are going to stop about 1/2 of an inch down, which is the amount of our seam allowance. And we are going to sew just inside this inner row of stitching, about 1/2 of an inch down from where this stitching starts. So I'm coming up on my stitching, I'm going to make sure that the stitching I'm making now is going to the inside of my previous stitching, and I'm going to go down about 1/2 inch so that where my stitching stops is below where my first stitching started. And we should be able to open this up. When you open this back pleat up, you want to be down past where the pleat is connected. So I'm going to go a little bit further. You don't want to see the top edge of that pleat. So now when I open this up, I can pull open the pleat here and I don't see the top edge. Now this is still open, and we are going to continue the next steps over at the iron. Okay, so now we are at the iron and I'm looking at the wrong side of my center back piece. I have laid it open, and this is my center back seam here. And what I have done with my pleat is I have lined up this center notch with the center back seam and spread it so that each of the folds of the pleat here are on either side. And I have my underneath sort of lined up nice and flat. Side notches of my pleat are right where this is folding on either side. I have a notch here and a notch here. And the first thing I'm going to do is press this in place. Now, since I have backed this with muslin, my pressing of my pleat is fine, but I am going to use a press cloth for the center back seam because this is a coated fabric that is going to help it to be waterproof, and I don't want to melt it with my iron. So once you have a nice pressed open seam, it is going to look like this. And the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to take some fusible, I don't know how well you can see this, it's very light, hem tape, and I'm going to use it to keep this pleat in place so that I can do some cute stitching from the right side of my raincoat, some cute top stitching. So I am going to cut a piece that fits just under, and I'm putting this in between the center back and my pleat, and I am just going to press that in place. Now I have my iron on a lower heat setting because, as I said, this is a heat sensitive fabric, so it might take a little while. And then you can just flick it with your finger just to make sure that it held in place. It doesn't have to be like completely stable, like I said, because we are going to stitch on top of it. I'm going to cut this, another piece for the other side, lift that up, place it right here, and then press that in place. Again, if you flick the corner and it doesn't come up, then we are in good shape. Now let's flip this raincoat over and see how we are looking from the front. We have a nice pleat opening here with our understitching. If you want to be really fun, you can cut your pleat in a contrast color. And I like to give this another press from the right side just to make sure I have a nice crisp center back seam and that pleat is holding into place. Okay. Now we are going to head to our machine. Okay, so back at our machine, I have put some top stitching thread, which I'm just using a contrast regular size thread for this instance. It may be hard to see, but I have drawn myself a guideline. I've marked where the edge of my pleat is, and I've just sort of done this by feeling the ripple of the fold underneath. And I've given myself a stitch line that is below the top seam allowance of the pleat, which I am also just telling by feeling, but above the opening of our pleat. So I want my cross stitch to be above the top opening of the pleat, but below the seam allowance. So I'm catching the seam allowance of the pleat underneath the jacket and holding that in place. Now you can just stitch a straight line all the way across. You do want to try to get as close to the edge of your pleat as possible. Or if you want, you can do a cute arrowhead. If you have an embroidery machine, you could play with the embroidery settings and do some cute stitching in that way. I'm gonna do little arrows just because I feel like that is the easiest thing. And I have pre-drawn on my arrows, so I'm going to use that as a guide. And I'm going to start with my arrow point so that when I come back around to the tip of my arrow, I can turn and go across to the other side. And when I get to this point, I'm going to do my other arrow, which is basically just a triangle, but this is a easy and cute way to add a fun detail to your raincoat. And I just hand stitch these, or I just drew these by eye. So as you can see, they're not exactly even, or symmetrical I should say, but that's okay. And if you want, you can go back in and fill those with either some hand embroidery, or you can fill them with machine stitching as well, so they are filled in. I may do that in just a moment, but now your back pleat is secure on the back end. You can see that we have caught our seam allowance and it is stitched down in place. It is roughly parallel to the top edge of our pleat. We have caught our pleat, and so that is going to help ensure that our pleat is laying nicely from the right side of the garment. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them for me in the comments below. And be sure to check out the sew along page on my website for more tutorials involving the Whitney raincoat. Happy sewing! Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I hope you learned something today. If you did, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and let me know in the comments below if there are any other tutorials you would like to see in the future. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my future videos by clicking this button right here. And you can check out my other tutorials in my tutorial playlist right here. I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye!